thanks for joining us for another edition of the Wayne Public Library's virtual jazz series. I have the great pleasure today of conversing with the wonderful trumpeter, Freddie Hendrix.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. So let's get started here. We'll go back in time. You are a New Jersey resident and you grew up in Teaneck, correct?
That is correct.
And
Teaneck, New Jersey.
you began performing publicly at age 12 at the Presbyterian Church in Teaneck.
Sounds
And
about right.
you knew by your junior year in high school that you were going to pursue being a professional musician.
Yes.
I had I noted that you also had an interest in art and also sports.
Yes. Wow. You really have done your research.
So what made music overtake all these other interests?
Um, as far back as I can remember, being at least 3 or 4 years old, my brother's my middle-aged brother, his name is Anthony. He's autistic. He always played records in the house, and so I can remember as clear as day, just like it was yesterday. Listening to George Benson Breezin' and Marvin Gaye live at the Palladium, the London Palladium, and Roberta Flack and Al Green, all of these great groups in music and stuff. And I just coming up hearing all of these sounds, it's always been a joy for me. I've always enjoyed it from child age all the way through my adulthood. So music has just always been in my soul.
So you also you were playing at the church, so obviously you had the gospel and blues really from that probably influenced your playing as well. Yes.
Absolutely.
Now
Indeed.
being around music and like you said, listening to the records at home with your brother and your family, did you develop your ear first, do you think, and then learned how to read music, or was it kind of all at once?
I relied primarily on my ear. For some reason, um, I understood notes and notation, but it didn't really register so much in my mind. I understood lines and spaces in terms of where the notes go and stuff, but in terms of the rhythm, I didn't quite get. And so reading was very difficult for me. And for whatever reason, it just I wasn't absorbing it. And so my ears became my best friend. And of course, obviously, from listening to music long before I even started learning about notation and things of that matter, I guess it was just a very intuitive thing to rely on my ears.
Do you think a lot of jazz musicians who have such a natural talent come to it first by just that inner, like you said, hearing it by ear, and then come to it later to learn composition and arranging and charts?
Absolutely, music is an emotion. What makes you feel good is what you go based off of. So yeah, it starts there.
Are you also a singer?
Uh, I wouldn't consider myself a singer. I do sing around the house, in particular, things that I listen to, but out in public so much, I might not do that. I mean, I have actually been called as of lately to sing a number here and there, but I wouldn't actually consider myself a singer. I'm primarily a trumpet player.
Right. So you are a trumpeter, a flugelhorn player, a composer, an arranger, and an educator. That's a very wonderful, extensive resume topics, if you will. I also want to say that I had the pleasure of seeing you at William Patterson's first Jazz Room series this spring in February, and it was a
Wonderful.
real joy to be there. And your tone is just beautiful. It's
Wow.
just wonderful, and on both trumpet and flugelhorn, which I'm very partial to. I want to talk to you a little bit about the differences between trumpet and flugelhorn. Is there a different embouchure? Is there a different mouthpiece size? And if I can piggyback on that, also about where a cornet fits into that.
Oh, okay.
Good
Interesting
question.
questions. Um, it is a different mouthpiece is used for all three horns, one being the cornet, trumpet, and flugelhorn. The trumpet and cornet mouthpiece wise are pretty close. Um, as far as the flugelhorn is concerned, the mouthpiece for the flugelhorn is much more deeper in terms of the inner cup of it. So, but other than that, they're pretty close. And obviously, there's a difference in the sound. There's no difference in the embouchure in terms of how you approach sitting that on your chops. But there is a difference in the actual sizes of the mouthpieces, but they're not like drastic.
Does that mean that you could easily play a tuba or a trombone or other brass?
I wouldn't say it would be easy. Actually, it would be a little difficult because the diameter of those mouthpieces are much bigger, so it would encompass much more of your chops as opposed to on the trumpet, which is mainly encompasses just the center of the aperture. The on a trombone or a tuba, it would like cover over the top. Your lips are literally inside the mouthpiece, so that's much different.
Right. Do you
And what
all,
also requires it, I mean, it's the embouchure is kind of the same, but in terms of the way the pressure is distributed, it would be a little bit different.
do you play the cornet as well?
Very rarely. I own one, and I almost never pull it out the case. I mainly just concentrate on just trying to play the trumpet. It's hard enough as it is.
Well, you make it look very easy.
Thank
Um,
you.
so, what brought you to trumpet and flugelhorn, and was Roy Eldridge a influence to you?
Oh, what is Roy Eldridge influence to me? Um, well, what got me interested in the instrument, there was a gentleman uh, from Omaha, Nebraska. His name is David Brown. He was worked for the Teaneck Board of Education in those days, and usually when you get around fourth or fifth grade, uh, they start to introduce all of the instruments to you. So they go through. They have at that time they had a string specialist, and she would demonstrate all the string instruments and go through the whole family of strings, like the violin and the cello and the viola and so forth and so on. Then you have a woodwind specialist, a flute specialist, and then there was a brass specialist and also a percussion specialist. But Mr. Brown was the specialist for all of the brass, and he demonstrated the tuba and the euphonium and the trombone. But when he picked up the trumpet, the magic, the sound that came out of the end of his horn just touched my soul. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. I would love to try that. And so that's what struck my interest in wanting to pursue that particular instrument. Roy Eldridge, he just becomes an influence when you start to study the legacy of the instrument. I first started with Louis Armstrong. Him and Joe Newman were the first two trumpet players that were records that were actually in my household, and so I came up listening primarily to them, and then of course once I started learning about the other trumpet players, then that's how I started getting into Roy Eldridge and Dizzy Gillespie and other players alike.
Well, Roy Eldridge also played flugelhorn, and I was wondering if that was what brought you into that direction.
No, I wasn't aware of that. Actually, what got me interested in the flugelhorn was Chuck Mangione. There was a record that was very popular in that time period called "Feel So Good." If I'm not mistaken, I think it might have came out around the time that I was born, which was in 1976. And yeah, that was also another household a record that was in our household, and I came up listening to that, and so it was such a beautiful sound. And of course, pursuing the trumpet and exploring the world of jazz, that struck my interest in wanting to investigate that instrument as well.
I also owned Feels So Good as well as Main Squeeze and Children of Sanchez, and I am a huge Chuck Mangione fan. So I'm happy to know that he had a part in getting you there.
Absolutely.
So I was looking through all the different bands you played with, and I have to say that it looks like you played at a lot of birthday bashes. I just want to point this out because it's incredible, and I want to be at hanging out with you because you seem to be at all the parties. So just a quick listing here is you were at the Jimmy Fallon House Band for Jimmy's birthday in
Right.
September 2014. Aretha Franklin at Radio City Hall in 2014 for her birthday.
Yeah.
In 2015, and then Stanley Clark's birthday at the Blue Note, and Steve Wilson's birthday, his 90th birthday at Jazz Standard.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm gonna
You really have done your research. I'm impressed.
you go to all the parties. I like how you play here, and you got to play at the White House twice. Would you like to
Yes,
tell
I
me
did.
about that?
Sure. So there's a gentleman by the name of Fred Wesley, who's the trombonist for the late great James Brown. And I met Fred Wesley approximately in 1997 as doing my undergrad at William Patterson College, then turned to university. And one of my peers, a saxophonist, his name is Chris Kuzmi. He was kind of doing an internship with a music engineer by the name of Bob Both that had a studio located in Butler, New Jersey, which is not that far from the college. And in him doing this internship with Bob Both was friends with Fred Wesley. And Fred Wesley was currently at that time working on a project for the group called the JBs. So it's called Fred Wesley and the JBs. And he had a few tracks that he needed to complete for the recording. And he was in need of a trumpet player and a sax player. So Chris, being the intern, obviously, and us, and both him and I were a part of a funk band that we did as an extracurricular kind of thing outside of the program when we were students there, called the 42 Main Street Delicatessen Band. So we were heavily into funk and checking out James Brown and Parliament and all these groups alike that consist of the funk era. And so when this opportunity presented itself, Chris came to me right away and he was like, "Hey man, Fred Wesley's coming to Bob Bo's studios to finish up this record and he needs a trumpet player." And he was like, do you want to do it? And I was like, do I want to do it? Of course. So we both went over to the studio on a designated day and met Mr. Wesley. And he says, "Yeah, man, you guys come on in." He was like, "You guys can read some music, right?" And we said, "Yeah." And he was like, "Do you improvise?" And we said, "Yeah, we can improvise too." He was like, "Great, fantastic." He said, "All right. So I want to play you one of the tracks that we're doing that we need. I want to add sax and trumpet to, because he said, I've been soloing on most of the record and I don't want to solo on all of the tracks. So he said, I'm gonna play this song for you, and you know, just get an earful and tell me what you think. So he played it down one time, primarily the section where we were going to solo in. Just played it once, and he tells Bob to stop the tape, and he says, "All right, who's gonna go first?" Just like that, and I was like, "Whoa." And I was like, "Really?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "Who wants to take solo?" And so I said, "All right, I'll go first." I was deciding to be daring, so I took the first take and did one pass in the solo part. So there's no there was music written, but there was no chord changes written. So I'm totally going by ear. And he did this deliberately. So then after I did my take, then Chris gave it a shot and he played a pass over the solo chorus. And then Fred Wesley picked up his trombone and he said, all right, now I'll play one. And then he plays a solo. Now, when he played his solo, I was so inspired. I was like, all right, I'm ready. I know exactly what I need to do. Can I get another pass? And he says, no, you only get one shot. And because the song was called On the Spot. And he deliberately wanted something that was on the spot, in the spur of the moment, a moment's notice. And so, coincidentally, my solo made that recording. So if you research that, James Brown, Fred Wesley and the JBs record, and it was the title track. It's called On the Spot. That's my trumpet solo that's on that record. And that was my introduction to Fred Wesley. Now, getting to the point, because you're asking me, how did I end up at the White House? I'm telling you this long story, but it's all related. So after that recording in 1997, I hadn't seen or spoke to Fred Wesley. And 10 years, literally almost 10 years had passed. And in 2007, out of the blue, I get a phone call from a well-known classical clarinetist by the name of David Krakauer, who was a longtime Juilliard graduate. I believe he was a student at Juilliard when Wynton Marsalis was also attending the school. And he was a really great concert clarinetist, but he also was exploring klezmer music because of his Jewish background and culture. And he got this idea to start a new band combining klezmer music with funk. So hence now this is where Fred Wesley comes back into play, because he wanted Fred to co-lead this band, and Fred Wesley had recommended me to him to play with them, the three of them and 8 other band members for a one-night concert at Carnegie Hall. And he said, would you like to be a part of this special project? And I said, sure. He said, it's a brand new thing. We haven't recorded anything, and we're still kind of working out the music. We're not sure what's going to come of this, if anything comes of it, but would you like to be a part of it? And I said, sure. So we had a successful concert and ended up developing a sound. And out of that, developed this band called Klezmer Madness. And in pursuit of this band that we used at Carnegie Hall, then gave Fred a chance to hear how I had progressed since he met me 10 years ago as a student at William Patterson. And I guess he was impressed, because by then he had taken a serious liking to me. Obviously, I had already made an impression to him for him to even call me to play with him at Carnegie Hall. But after touring with this band, it just solidified the deal. And that turned into him asking me if I would like to join him to play at the inauguration for former President Barack Obama when he had first got into office in 2012. So that's how I ended there the first time. The second time was when he was getting ready to leave office, and obviously they had asked Christian McBride and the Christian McBride Big Band if we would like to be a part of that. And Christian happily accepted. So I got a second chance, and it was wonderful, because my wife and I's son, Barbara, and myself, our son John, was born approximately 2 or 3 days after that performance. So it's a really, really wonderful time. And it's also a very nerve-wracking time because I had took my wife with me because we were scared that my son was gonna pop out at the wrong moment. So we really took a chance, but it was the opportunity of a lifetime, and very hard to pass up, and everything ended up working out the way that it should.
That's fantastic. Is that at that time with the Christian McBride band? Is that when the movement was played?
No, that was a separate occasion for that.
That's an incredible piece. Really beautiful.
Very, very incredible piece. Took a long time for that to come out because he had to get a lot of clearance from all of the estates of the four Black icons that he wrote the music for and dedication to.
Right. And then it's developed into the Revisited, and I believe this year or last year he performed it again.
Yes, just this year. I was
Yeah.
supposed to be on that performance, but I had to be somewhere else, so I missed that one.
Next one.
Next time.
So you mentioned funk and all the other types of music and klezmer. So when you're playing for Alicia Keys, which is more of a pop sound, well,
Right.
I pop has
Yes.
such a weird definition to it. It's so inclusive of everything. But between pop and jazz and funk and klezmer and anything else, blues, gospel, what do you need to do as a musician to change your style, or is it just again innate, or is it a different mindset? How do you go about doing that?
They are different mindsets. I would just say, to any musician, it's not a secret. You just need to immerse yourself in that style of music. If you're going to be a classical musician, you have to be checking out classical music. If you're going to play funk music, you have to check out, the forefathers of that music, any style of music. You need to do a deep research, try to go back and check out the people that started it. How did it originate? How has it evolved through the years? Especially in jazz, because it's been so long that in existence now. The history is vast, and so when you have younger musicians out today, they don't want to dig all the way back to Louis Armstrong. It's too far back for them, because to them, they can't relate to it, because what was going on then is not what's going on now. But at the same time, if you want to have the deepest connection that you possibly could have, my advice is to go back and research that. Even if you're not that much into the style of it, at least have a perspective and an understanding of where it was and how it developed. Because without it, you have no direct connection to the bloodline of the music. So that it's like you're cutting yourself off. What's the best word I can use? You're like, it's like you're dislocating yourself from it,
You
so
need that foundation, and that gives you the building blocks then to not only create what your own sound is, but if you, as you're saying, if you are open to all these different styles of music, much like you express, where you're able to take different styles like funk or hip hop or klezmer and put it all into a whole new sound. This is how
absolutely
sound develops. This is how jazz developed, and it's going to
how
continue
all
to.
music develops. It's like if we were building a house, you can't have a house with no foundation. You can make a roof, but where's that roof going to sit? Everything starts from the bottom, and it works its way up. And in studying music, it works the same way. That's why a lot of people didn't understand when Wynton first came on the scene and became a household name. They were like, oh, it's like he's going backwards. Why is he digging back into the Ellington days and stuff? And it's because he's trying to capture the essence of where the music originated from, and that feeling, and trying to regenerate that in today's times, because it'll be a lost art if somebody doesn't take the time to research that and have a complete understanding of it and moving the music forward. It's needed. You know, we need more Marsalises out there to do these kind of things.
I want to just jump ahead to something, and then we're going to jump all over the place today. But you have participated in something through a Jazz Reach program, an abbreviated history of the jazz trumpet, and it's an amazing abbreviation because there's 5 decades all smushed, or even 7 decades smushed into this one little document that I have here, which is incredible. And you were part of that. And so in reading through that and the different trumpeters who are highlighted throughout the different decades, I got to thinking about those innovators those who had a huge impact on jazz, who developed and evolved jazz as a whole. And of course comes to mind Charlie Parker, Art Tatum. But in looking through what you had participated with, it seems that many of these innovators who had a huge impact in how jazz changed were all trumpeters. So if you look at Louis Armstrong, Roy Eldridge, Dizzy Gillespie, and Miles Davis, just to name those four, the huge impact that they had on jazz from the beginning and how it developed. Can you talk a little bit about that?
You mean like the family tree of trumpet players?
Well, yes, and also the impact that they had on jazz and developing it from the early time through swing into bebop and then hard bop.
Well, simply stated, you can't have one without the other. How it works is the jazz trumpet and all of the instruments, in the musical families, all of the woodwinds, all of the, great pianists, bass players, percussionists, all of that. We're all one big tree. And those that tree has many branches. And so, and they just keep growing and stretching out over time. Just like a real tree, if you never cut it, it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And so that's very much how the jazz trumpet is. And Louis Armstrong, of course, there were people before him, but he was the one that really made jazz a household name. People got into the music and respected it because of the way, not only the way Louis played, but also by the way he conducted himself. And he was a very joyous man, a very spiritual man, and spread this joy and love. He was a gracious man. He was always giving, always, because he himself grew up, in a very poor environment and didn't have things. And when he gained success, he gave back to the community in so many ways. And he was our ambassador of jazz. And so through him spawns Roy Eldridge. And what makes Roy Eldridge special is that he's like half Louis Armstrong, but then also half of what's to come, because now you start to see another facet or another dimension in trumpet virtuosity and his approach to improvisation and the whole concept of how jazz trumpet can be approached and achieved. So he started playing more notes and arpeggiating more of the chords, so to say. Louis Armstrong, when he played, if I could describe best, he played like the way he sang. He played like a vocalist. His concept of soloing is very lyrical. That's why his sound is so broad and provoric and beautiful And but yet he had also had really, really great range. And so Roy Eldridge just continued that. So where Louis Armstrong stopped, you know, Louis Armstrong could play as high as maybe like a high concert E flat above middle C on a staff. And so, which is very high for the trumpet, especially in those days. And Roy Eldridge then surpassed him by increasing the range and went from playing a high concert E flat all the way up to a high double B flat, which is like almost like a octave plus a fifth more. So, and he's improvising up there. He's hearing notes up super high and playing this like virtuosic trumpet. So that was a huge change in the legacy of jazz trumpet. And so then comes Dizzy Gillespie, who yet now is like half Roy Eldridge, but then also half himself, because what these guys do is in Miles Davis, they take the fundamentals of what one great trumpet player does and they expound upon those fundamentals. That's what makes jazz great, and that's how it evolves. These guys lay down a blueprint, if you will, of a certain style and a certain way, a lifestyle of playing. The way they improvise is they're playing their life experiences. You know, when you're young, you don't know as much, and as you grow into manhood, womanhood, the pain and the struggles and the trials and tribulations that you overcome, all of that stuff becomes a part of your music, your moral fiber, your fabric of everything that makes you who you are. It comes out in your music, also in your compositions, and so that's how the legacy of the trumpet begins to grow, because one person lays down one way of playing, and the next person becomes highly influenced by that, and they then take those fundamentals and move it a step further. You know, so that's why I was saying in the beginning of this particular topic, you can't have one without the other. There's no Roy Eldridge if there was never a Louis Armstrong. There's no Dizzy Gillespie if there wasn't a Roy Eldridge. There's no Miles Davis if there wasn't a Dizzy Gillespie, so forth and so on. Because Miles was also influenced by Dizzy, but the thing with Miles, who also became a cut above the rest, or broke away from the tree, so to say, he couldn't do all of the things that Dizzy could do from a technical perspective. He admired and strived to try to play like that, but to a degree it was like beyond his reach. And also he started to notice that wasn't really his personality and his identity. He heard music in a different way, and it was Charlie Parker who noticed that in him as a young man coming up, learning the music. He says, you have a great sound, and you play a certain way. He said you should focus more into that as opposed to trying to copy everything that Dizzy did, because there was also, then you got a trumpet player that was also equally important in the legacy of jazz trumpet, and that trumpet player was Fats Navarro. And Fats Navarro is unique because he could do a lot of what Dizzy was doing. But then yet, even with him, you can, if you look at his improvisations, like transcriptions of his improvisations on paper, you can see that his concept started to change even from Dizzy. There's some things, there's some classic characteristic licks that Dizzy did that Fats copied, but yet you start to see even a deterrence in his approach. And so, but Miles had also he had a very lyrical approach, more simplistic approach, which you start to hear more of when you get into the birth of the cool era. And then from there, then you're starting to really hear Miles, because now he's tapping into his own identity. And that's what I mean. You have to take the fundamentals of what these great masters did and find a way to find your voice. We all speak the same language, but you have to find your way to tell the world who you are and why you are of importance and why you have something to say and why this is how the music is. That's the spirit of the music.
Thank you. That was a great explanation, and I've learned quite a lot here. Now, I want to talk about Rufus Reid, who was not only a professor at William Patterson, but also a mentor to you. Oh, and yeah. Let's talk about his influence on you.
I first met Rufus, well, I should say I knew of Rufus when I was in 8th grade. When I was coming up in junior high, when I got to 8th grade, just before I started high school, in these days, they had competitions, jazz competitions. And if you auditioned and got in, you would first get into what it was called regional jazz band, which was open to different schools in different districts, but within your county. And then they had what was called all-state jazz band, and which is yet even broader. And now you're getting out of the counties. Now this becomes a statewide competition, where if you audition and got in, then, so I was doing all of these kinds of things. And particularly, I was doing region jazz band at the time that I first discovered Rufus Reid. And when he walked in the room, he seemed larger than life. It's like there was just an energy with him when he walked into a room. When he walked in, you're like, whoa. It was, if I could say, like, as a young kid, he felt like God to me. That's the power of the energy, just the energy that he has when he walked in the room, and my first trumpet teacher, David Brown, was my coincidentally was my regional jazz band director. When I was in 8th grade, he had been chosen that year to be the director for it. And in preparation for our concert, he had brought in Rufus Reid just to say a few words and stuff like that. And I saw how much he revered Rufus. If I can be so bold, it's almost like he reverted into a childlike state when Rufus was in the room. And from me having the high respect that I did for David Brown, made that even twice or 3 times more when I saw Rufus from myself. So then comes 9th grade, I finally get into high school. And I was presented with an opportunity to do an audition called Jazz at the Willowbrook Mall, which was in, is that Verona, New Jersey, or what?
That's in Wayne.
Yeah, that's in Wayne, right? So, of course, I
All
went.
comes home. Everything comes back to Wayne, right?
Yes, it does. And so, coincidentally, at the time, I had completed uh, my private studies with David Brown in the summer after I graduated 8th grade, just before I started 9th. He sat me down in a summer lesson, and he says, "Man," he says, "I've poured all my essence into you, and there's nothing more that I can teach you. And now it's time for you to move on to someone else." And so from there, he introduced me to a gentleman by the name of David Rogers. And David Rogers, coincidentally, also Teaneck resident, was a college professor at William Patterson College at that time. So, and when I was studying with Dave Rogers, uh, um, he, I was a private student of his, and of course, he helped to prepare me for the audition. But there was two other students who also were students of his. One of them went to Teaneck High School, and another was from another town called Wyckoff. But we all studied with Dave Rogers. And so when we went through this audition, because we all three students were all students of his, he felt he was a little bit biased to be the judge of who should make this special band for this performance at Jazz at the Willowbrook Mall. And so he called in Rufus Reed in the audition, and we all had to improvise on a blues. We had to take turns improvising. And so Rufus sat back and he listened to all three of us play. And when we completed the song, he stopped the band and he says, "Well, you sounded like this, and you played like this." And then he pointed to me, but he said he's the only one that played something different, you know. And so, and that impressed him, because to him, to Rufus, if you play something different every chorus, to him that was true improvisation.
Right.
And so, so he chose me as the recipient to be a part of this band, and so that was my introduction to Rufus, and from that point on, I was on his radar, so to say, and it was kind of in a weird sense, as like I was foredestined to go to William Patterson. You know, all the stars aligned for me to go to that particular school.
So I just want to mention that you were on the recording of the Rufus Reed Quintet in 2007 of Live at the Kennedy Center.
Yes.
That must have been a great honor to be part of. And I also want to mention that this is the 50th anniversary of the jazz program at William Patterson.
I'm well aware. I will be there. I'm going to be a part of that too.
You're part of that, Jones's?
Yeah, I'm supposed to be a part of the performance. I don't know to what capacity, because there's going to be a lot of guests that particular day, but we'll work that out, I guess, when we get there.
Well, as we know, wherever there's a celebration or a birthday, you seem to be there. So it's not a surprise to me that you're there. And maybe I can find my way backstage to say hello in person.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about, so as a trumpeter, you have the ability to perform as a sideman or in an ensemble, or as a section player, and also as a leader. So when you performed earlier in February, you had your own band. What are the different responsibilities? It's a question I've asked at other interviews of, and those different forms. And I know that a big part of it is listening. What is there anything else you can add to what a musician needs to do when you're asked to be in different formations?
Well, yes, sure, of course. If you're going to be a side man, your job is to do anything and everything that the leader asks of you. That's your job. If he says, I need you to be there for sound check at a certain time, that's your responsibility to make sure that you're there. The leader tells you we're wearing, this is going to be the attire for the concert. That's your responsibility to make sure that you wear the proper uniform. All of these things, and it's a relatively easy job. All you got to do is just listen and do your job well. Study up on your music, learn your parts, and it's painless. Being a leader is very stressful. It is not easy by any means. Being a band leader takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of patience, because you have to do everything. You have to make sure that all your band members make it to the gig on time, make it to sound check on time. You got to run the music to make sure that it's going to be presentable for when what we call game time, when if the downbeats at 4:00, or like for the William Patterson Jazz Room series, they start at 4. But for normal gigs, it's usually like 7:30, 8:00. The responsibility is you gotta hit right on time and get off the stage on time. And in some cases, like you have to like police the band, depending on what kind of flow and connection you have with them. Now, if everybody's on the same page and there's there are people that you play with all of the time, then you don't necessarily have to police them so much. It all depends. Especially in particularly if you're on a tight schedule. So like if you're given a lot of the opportunity to play a performance, and they say, we want you to play 60 minutes exactly, or 45 minutes exactly. It's your responsibility as the leader to make sure that you finish on time. And that's a hard thing to do, because you got to like keep your eye on the clock, but you don't necessarily want people thinking like you're on your phone, like texting somebody or something like that. So, it's a lot, and you don't want to, and everybody's sensitive. Musicians are very, very sensitive. You got to speak to people a certain way so they don't, get all bent out of shape and stuff. And as I'm sure you saw the day that we performed, because I had to do a lot of policing that day. Because we had a couple new members in the band, not new in terms of we never played together before, but like we were playing new music. And a couple of my buddies, like the drummer that played with us that day, he wasn't the original drummer that was supposed to be on that gig. The original drummer had ended up backing out, so I ended up having to get a sub. And so we only had one rehearsal, and that's a lot. It was a lot of music to go through in a little bit of time, and try to play it with conviction that people say, wow, like this music is powerful, because that's what I strive to do as a leader. I want my music to uplift people. I want people to walk away feeling good about the moment, feeling good about themselves, something that uplifts them, makes them, if they're blue, Art Blake used to say, music washes away the dust of everyday life. And in order to do that, the music has to be spectacular. The performance has to be stellar, so there's a lot of concentrated energy that everybody has to be in tune with. And that's what makes jazz so special, but yet so complicated, and in terms of, it's hard to execute that type of excellence. Again, unless like you're dealing with a group of individuals that you play with all of the time, and then you're in a routine and everybody understands the flow of things and you don't have to say anything. They can just sit down and just play and let the magic happen. But particularly in my situation that day, we didn't have that luxury. We had to be on our P's and Q's, so to say. And so when it's like that, it's very intense because I want, again, as a leader, I want to put on a very strong performance, because that was a very special day for me, because not only is it my alma mater, but it was the first time that the audience was getting a chance to see me as a leader and as a composer, because most people know me for my playing. They don't know me for being a composer. And so first impression is important. So
Well, I
you
can say from
did it.
being there, it was unbelievably fantastic.
Thank
You
you.
got a standing ovation. It was well deserved. I recorded it on my phone and have been listening to it, and it brings a great joy to me to listen to it. I've touched on other interviews is the fact that jazz, especially to me, is some sort of, there's an alchemy. It's a magician's world where some way this combo will get together and create a music where it's joyful, and then the next alchemy is translating that to the audience, and as an audience member we can feel when it's flowing, we can feel when it's
Absolutely.
natural, and
Absolutely.
it's an incredible thing when that happens. And there are concerts that I have been to, and I'm sure you have too, where you don't necessarily have that same kind of connection or flow. But
That's
when it
right.
happens, that makes it all the more wonderful. And your concert in February was fantastic. I enjoyed it immensely, as did
Absolutely.
everybody. So I want to talk a little bit about your compositions. So
Sure.
in 2010, we're going to talk about your CD Jersey Cat. So this was
Okay.
recorded in 2010, and after many trials and travails to have a publisher to release it, which it was released in 2016.
Right.
And of the songs on this, it is 5 of your original compositions.
Absolutely.
So when you compose a song, is there um, do you set down to say, okay, I want to do it something in 3/4 time, I want to do something in 4/4 time, or how do you start your compositions and where do you go with that?
I do have those things in mind. Um, Usually, um, I try to let I try to let the spirits up above
Yeah.
direct me in that. And what I mean is, um, music to me comes from another place, and so um, just from years of study, you 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 kind of I always start with the groove, because that that is what creates the emotion for the piece. And so I always think about the bass. I think it's probably just because of my upbringing, being around Rufus for so long and playing with so many of the great legendary bass players in this music. It's just how I envision music now. But I usually either a melody comes to me, or some type of groove, some type of bass line, or some type of drum rhythm enters my mind, and that's what sparks it. And then from there, then I'll start to put a little bit of my brain thinking there, and conceive, should this piece be in 3/4, or certain type time signature. What's going to be the feel of the piece? Is it going to be Latin and African influenced, or is it going to be a swing thing? Or can it be a combination of, all of these things, come into play once you get a start, but it has to start somewhere. Sometimes a melody can come to me in full. Sometimes you can have like a little fragment of it. Sometimes uh, I can sit, it can take me days, and I have to figure it out like a jigsaw puzzle. Like uh, I'll have like a bass line, and then I have to sit down at the piano and try to work out the chords that fit with that bass line. And then from there, it just starts to grow like a, like a parasite or amoeba or something. It starts to evolve into something. And so, it's a process. It's very fun. And that's, to me, when you start to compose music as an artist, that's when you really start to see truly who you are as a person. To me, that's the true voice of the artist. It's what they write.
Would you say the same applies also for when musicians arrange? You did all the arrangements for Jersey Cat. So do you say the same for finding a voice in your arranging?
Sure. Yeah, because you know when you're making a record, at least this is my opinion, every record has to have a concept. What is it that you're trying to convey to the audience? You have to tell a story. You want your music to tell a story. And every album is a story. It's every composition you write is a child that you birthed. And the record, whatever that record is, it should tell its story. From, like, so if it's the story of the Wizard of Oz, that all of the music in that should encompass what that is. If we're reading Moby Dick, or something like that, your music should be a concept. And all of the tunes and the arrangements, they have to have a flow. So there's a lot of thought process that has to go into it, but yet at the same time, you don't want your thought process to override what's coming from here. You have to use an equal balance, and that, to me, I think that's one of the primary reasons why a lot of people don't enjoy jazz. It's not at the forefront like the way pop music is. People flock to music that makes them want to dance, or makes them, want to move their body, or clap their hands, or jump for joy, whatever. That's what music is. Music is supposed to evoke those types of emotions. And we, to some degree, we lost a lot of that in jazz. It's become very cerebral and not so much from here. So when I compose music, I try to bring that back.
So when you're doing your compositions or arrangings for a recording or even for a concert, what is it part of the decision process to do it as a trio or present it as a quintet or a septet or a non-ed? Like, how do you, is that something that is just organically coming to be, or is it something that you think about?
Um, it's kind of a combination of the two. It depends on how you hear the song. Some songs that you write, you might be writing specifically for a specific setting. And then sometimes you could be writing a song and say, I think I'm hearing, like, some other voices. Maybe this should be written for two horns or three horns as opposed to one or two. So it really depends.
That's interesting. And so then I guess that influences then if you're performing your own compositions and how you're putting together your ensemble.
Absolutely.
Very interesting. Two other things I'd like to talk about. In 2020, you participated in with Jazz House Kids. Christian McBride hosted this event called Trumpet Talk, and it was
Okay.
with Marcus Printub, yourself, Ted Chubb, and Nathan Eklund. I
Yeah.
had the pleasure to meet Ted Chubb in the fall, and he's actually going to be performing here in the fall with Oscar Perez's quartet.
Wonderful.
So I love the fact that on this advertisement was that Christian McBride kept everyone on their best behavior. Now, again, where there's a party, there's Freddie Hendrix.
Yeah.
So that must have been a blast. You want to talk a little bit
Yep.
about that?
Sure, sure. Well, of course, that was in the height of the pandemic, and everybody was yearning just for some human contact and friendship and fellowship again, and so I was happy to be a part of that, and honored to be a part of it, because they're all great trumpet players and all great friends of mine, and we all love the same thing. And so it's always nice to hear other trumpet players speak about their influences and things that inspire them, or records, or particular songs that inspire them, and that's exactly what that was. It was just a meeting of the minds, and everybody kind of saying, "Hey, man, have you ever checked this out?" Some things everybody might have heard. Maybe somebody might have chose something that none of us heard. So, there's a lot of magic there when that went down. That was a fun time.
One of the songs they played was Dizzy Gillespie's "We,"
Yes.
and I believe that was written by Denzel Best. And what a fun song! I absolutely love listening to that.
Absolutely.
So now you're part of the Dizzy Gillespie All Stars. There have been 3 different iterations of it. I believe
3
you're part of
different
all
bands.
3.
Yes.
And you recently, I believe in the last few weeks, you were performing in, it was a Salt Lake?
Yes, Salt Lake City, Utah, with the special guest Paquito de Rivera.
John Lee was a bassist on that, and Carl Latham was a drummer. And John Lee and Carl will be performing here in June.
Wonderful.
And I'm really excited about that too. So we barely touched on Dizzy Gillespie's influence for, as you said, with dancing, with the Afro-Cuban jazz that he introduced and developed. Do you, of the different iterations of those 3 bands, which one do you like the most? Or can you say? What should you say?
I think I enjoy all of them pretty equally. Probably the small group is probably my most favorite. The Afro-Cuban Experience band.
It's a lot of fun there.
Absolutely.
So last year, in 2020, you were on another recording, and it was for the soundtrack of a movie called Driving While Black.
Oh,
and,
wow.
So the whole movie's title is Driving While Black: Race, Space, and Mobility in America.
Yes.
And just a little description of what that is discover how the advent of the automobile brought new mobility and freedom for African Americans, but also exposed them to discrimination and deadly violence, and how that history resonates today. So very timely and very needed in what is going on in this. How did you become a part of that soundtrack?
There's a gentleman by the name of Brian Keene, excellent composer. He's won a plethora of Emmy awards, and these are the type of people that you never really hear about. They're behind the scenes, but yet they're well established and have done lots of great things. And somehow my number was passed on to him. I can't exactly recall who that might have been. Could have possibly been Cyrus Chestnut, the great jazz pianist of our time, and but I'm not exactly certain. But in any case, he contacted me for that, and along with Steve Davis, trombonist Steve Davis, and drummer Jonathan Blake, and bassist Desron Douglas. That was the band, at least one of the configurations anyway, for that soundtrack music. And we went, I believe we recorded somewhere in Connecticut, and it was an all-day thing. And when we got there and set up, I'm thinking like it was gonna be, a couple takes of the songs and, get in and get out kind of. It was not that, man. So we started this recording, And this was a learning experience for me in all of my days of recording, because we played multiple takes of every song. And I must have played maybe 6 or 8 solos on every song. And I'm like, what is this dude doing? I couldn't figure out what's going. Is he not happy with what I'm doing? Am I doing something wrong? What's going on? Is he like got like a vengeance against trumpet players? Is somebody do him dirty? I'm like, what's going on? But no, he's just a super thorough composer and engineer. And what he likes to do, a part of his recording process, is to have multiple takes, so that when he gets into his editing process, if he wants to mix match things, he has enough to go off of. And some people, a lot of musicians are against, like, taking one track and combining it with another. It's kind of sacrilegious for a lot of musicians. They don't like that. They say, oh, that's not real jazz, it's because you taking away the what happened in the moment and stuff like that. But there is an art in what this gentleman Brian Keane did, and that's why he's won multi Emmy awards and other awards as such, and why he's in the position of scoring soundtrack music for this thing, Driving While Black. So there was a really great learning experience. But whew, what a rough day, because again, you have to remember, this is during the height of the pandemic, and I hadn't been doing much recording, let alone much playing. And so my chops that was a lot to get through the day. And it was a full day, like we started, maybe 11 or noon, and we didn't leave there until maybe 9, close to 10 o'clock that night.
I'm happy to say that soundtrack is available in our library database, which for free. Wonderful. With your library card. It's a database called Hoopla, so you can download Driving While Black soundtrack and listen to that. I have one last question for you, and I appreciate how much time you've taken to chat with me here. So, in all the things I've read and reviews and all the different things put together, many of your influences they kept mentioning were Woody Shaw, Freddie Hubbard, and they are two of several who played in Art Blakey's Messengers, including Lee Morgan and Donald Byrd. So is it coincidence that your influences are all part of Art Blakey's Messengers, Jazz Messengers?
Not necessarily. They're just, now, I mean, I've checked out all of the great trumpet players, and they all have something wonderful to offer. Just those 4 trumpet players, I just end up flocking to most often, just because I guess I have some type of deep affinity to their approach in music. The way they hear music is very much the way I hear things, and those are the tree branches that I chose to evolve from. So I mean, that could change. I got a long way to go and stuff like that. But in the midst of all of that, I'm really just trying to find myself. I'm just trying to go, especially nowadays, now that I'm gonna be 47 years old. That really is every jazz musician's mission in life, is to just to find out who you are and let the world know that. And I more than anything, I record myself almost all of the time, which is something that I learned from Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong recorded himself all of the time, all of the time. You would never think that, but he did. He was a perfectionist, and he understood that nothing was to stay the same. And even though he was hardcore in terms of being a swinger and not getting so much into bebop music and stuff like that. Steve, even with that type of mind frame, in his mind, he's still saying, I have to get better. I have to get better. And that's what makes those types of players so great. They're
Right.
always searching. It's a never ending process. They never become so much of themselves that, nothing can surpass that. These guys are always stretching the envelope, always trying to get, somewhere else. Ron Carter's like that. Jimmy Heath was like that. I mean, this man is 92 and he was still going on and off planes. And that, to me, those are the people that you have to bow down to, because and admire and respect, because they live for the music and they die for it. They'll do anything for it. And sometimes even I'm going to be 47 soon, and I get tired. I'm tired from traveling. It's a lot. It really wears on your mind and your body, but I just keep pushing forward. I think of those individuals that I had, those special moments, to be around them, and I use that as my fuel to keep pushing forward.
Well, for sure. I mean, much of what you just said, it can also be all applied to you. I mean, you're carrying on this legacy, and you can see that you are creating and striving for development and sharing that information with the next generation. And it really is incredible to see. And I have a great admiration and respect for your talent and for what you do. So thank you so much for taking the time to
Thank
talk
you
with me.
so much. This has been wonderful.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you again, and I hope to see you at the Dad Jones 100th birthday celebration.
I will be there, front and center.
All right, thank you again.
Thank you. Take care. God bless.